After the boys' cannon sounded, Fur muttered that another opponent was dead. They slowly began jogging until the cornucopia came into view, and they hid about 100 meters away from the metal horn. Sure enough, Calux was standing outside guarding the cornucopia, and to the shock of the pack, Alec from 3 was with him. Calux appeared to be shouting at Alec, who was standing his ground and holding his side with trembling hands. Unbeknownst to the pack, Calux had found Alec while trying to track Fur down and had taken him hostage. Calux appeared to have spared Alec under the condition that he helped mind the land surrounding the cornucopia. Calux and Alec appeared to be shouting about how long it would take for the mines to detonate, and so they did not notice Isla and Fur reach the back of the cornucopia and carefully jump over the mines and onto a nearby mound. Fur very nearly fell over, yet Isla swung out her arms to protect him. Fur thanked her and she glared at him through her pretty eyes, which made him stammer. Isla shook her head at him before leaping to another mound. Fur followed and the pair continued doing this until Fur misjudged his footing. Isla's eyes widened as Fur stopped his spear from very narrowly hitting the ground, and he nodded at Isla. They reached the back of the cornucopia and Isla jumped onto the horn, which caused her to gasp as her hand hit the metal hard. She let out a tiny groan and continued climbing, with Fur directly underneath her. They climbed above the cornucopia and noticed Calux still shouting at Alec. Willing to take her chances, Isla jumped off the roof and onto Calux's shoulders. Calux roared in surprise and shouted obscenities as soon as he saw that this was Isla. As he shouted at Isla to get off of him, Fur jumped down on Alec's shoulders before grabbing his face, which knocked both of them to the ground. Calux and Alec were utterly unprepared for the sudden attack by Isla and Fur, but then noticed Neptune and Just cheering their respective district partners on. Calux and Alec both fell to the ground and began fighting with Isla and Fur, whose weapons had fallen as they had jumped. Fur attempted to slam Alec's head into the ground, yet Alec managed to reach the mine detonator and switched it on. The mine nearest to the pair blew up and Fur and Alec were both thrown in opposite directions. Fur grabbed his spear and used it to deflect the many arrows Calux was now shooting at him, which angered Calux and he kicked Isla in the face. Isla shrieked, but less likely from the pain, and as she touched her face she shouted, "Mirror! I need a mirror!" Rubius muttered, "Shallow!" in a sing-song voice underneath his breath as Calux fired arrows at Isla. Realizing Calux would kill him in a matter of time, Alec tackled Calux to the ground and shouted compliments at Isla and Fur. Furious at this betrayal, Calux fired an arrow at Alec's throat. The arrow drove straight through his neck and he staggered backwards, before pitching forwards onto the ground as his cannon sounded. Calux grinned sadistically as he approached Fur and Isla. As Calux fired an arrow at Isla, Neptune roared in anger and jumped over the outer ring and onto several mounds, before reaching the golden horn, grabbing Alec's body and throwing it as hard as he could at Calux. Calux gasped in surprise as his human projectile knocked him off his feet and Neptune pummeled his head into the ground until he was knocked unconscious. He grabbed his allies and ran, and they were joined by Jess. Suddenly remembering they had forgotten to get supplies, Fur leapt over the mines and grabbed 2 backpacks before rejoining his allies. They immediately drank from 2 bottles of water in the bag and spent the rest of the day trying to find a safe cliff to camp on. Isla and Neptune embraced for a few moments and Neptune told her he wanted her to win these games. Isla told him she would like to win, and she wanted him to win too, but that the only way they could win both the games and Gale was to win without killing each other. Fur heard this and winced. He examined the contents of his bag, which contained matches, tools, extra clothing, and a sleeping bag. They found a safe cliff and sat on the edge before eating some of the bread, cheese, and beef strips found in the other backpack. Pleased to not have encountered any giant insects today, Fur and Jess both went to sleep quite early, whilst Isla and Neptune spoke for a bit. They did not, however, know that Fur was still awake and only pretending to be asleep. Night fell surprisingly quickly, and the portraits of only Alec from 3 and the boy from 12 were shown in the sky, which left Calux from 1, Neptune and Isla, both from 4, Train and Tamora, both from 6, Spruce and Holly, both from 7, Twyla from 8, Fur and Jess, both from 10, Spud and the girls from 11, and the girls from 12 remaining. Neptune took first watch and was clearly very groggy as the sun rose, but embraced Isla and spoke about guilt to her, despite her being asleep. Fur was awake, however, but Neptune did not know, and Fur whispered that he did not want the final fight to be between them. Fur muttered, "Time to out them," and crept up behind Neptune, and, after wiping a tear from his eye, slammed the spear into his back. Before Neptune's cannon had even sounded, Fur stabbed Jess in the head with his spear and dropped it into her hand, before pushing her body closer to Neptune as they both let go of life. He pretended to go back to sleep as their cannons rang out simultaneously and woke Isla up. Isla screamed and sobbed as she noticed Neptune's body, whilst Fur pretended to discover the body of Jess. Upon noticing the spear in Jess's hands, Isla shrieked again and shouted obscenities at Jess for killing the brother of her boyfriend. Fur gasped and pretended to be shocked, whilst Isla grabbed the spear from Jess's dead body and threw it into her body again and again. Training Master Astriana was invited into the commentary box by Rubius after this betrayal, and he fondly stated that he was proud of Fur for being so clever in managing to deceive Isla. Isla whispered sorry to Neptune's body, muttering that she couldn't save him. Fur appeared slightly amused by this, but posed as he was upset about the deaths of Neptune and Jess. Priscilla commented that if Fur won, he could act in the upcoming movie about President Gall her brother Strabo was filming. They decided to pack their supplies and move away in order to let the hovercraft retrieve the bodies of Neptune and Jess. Isla still appeared to learn about Neptune's demise, yet Fur managed to calm her down to some degree. They found a nearby cliff to rest and ate some of the beef strips. Isla muttered that Gil probably hated her for letting an outlier kill Neptune, whilst Fur appeared rather amused that she did not know it was him. As Isla reached for some water, a knife flew directly above her head and slammed into a nearby tree. Isla squealed and spun around just as Train charged towards her with a knife, whilst Tamora leapt out from behind a nearby tree. Spruce and Holly charged at Fur and pinned him to the ground, whilst Twyla and the girls from 11 and 12 grabbed their weapons. This ambush had been planned the previous day by this group, which had formed after they had encountered each other following the bloodbath on the first day. Rubius gasped at the sheer cowardice of this group as Train's knife sliced across Isla's arm. Fur struggled underneath the District 7 tributes in desperation, before kicking Spruce in the groin, which caused him to gasp in pain. Despite the pain in her arm, Isla managed to push Train into the tree, and she grabbed the knife from her arm, before plunging it into his neck and placing her knees on his shoulders. Train gasped for breath, but somehow managed to get out, which enraged Isla. She grabbed a fallen tree branch from the tree and slammed it into Train's face, before bringing it down again and again until Train's painful groans were silenced and his cannon sounded. To the shock of many, Spruce nodded at Holly and she threw her axe at Tamora, which hit her in the head and sounded her cannon. The girls from 11, furious at this betrayal, charged at Spruce, but he quickly beheaded her with his axe, which also sounded her cannon. This left only the girls from 12 and Twyla, although the latter had fled, and the girl from 12 tackled Isla to the ground, but Spruce kicked his axe towards Isla, which he used to amputate the legs of the girl. Fur threw a spear at her neck, and after a few moments her cannon sounded. Isla immediately aimed a knife at Spruce, and he slowly raised his hands above his head, before saying that he and Holly could help them. As Isla and Fur raised their eyebrows, Spruce and Holly grinned, before telling them that they knew how to trap trackerjackers and kill them. Fur scoffed in amusement, yet Spruce remarked that trackerjackers were common in this part of the arena, and he could trap them and use them to attack other tributes. Isla slowly lowered her knife and beckoned at Fur to lower his spear, which he did. They agreed to start an alliance with the District 7 tributes, which made Spruce grin. He and Holly led the pair toward the nearby tree, where Spruce and Holly constructed an elaborate net around the branches. He poured some type of liquid into the exterior of the net, before building an elaborate trap and resting. Isla, Fur, and the Sevens appeared wary of each other, but seemed too tired to kill each other. As they ate some bread from Holly's pack, Spruce asked Swanson if he could have some water before taking his shirt off, revealing an olive-toned, muscular body. Sure enough, a bottle of water soon arrived, and Spruce grinned before drinking it. Isla appeared annoyed by what Spruce had just done, yet she pretended not to care. Spruce appeared the tree before touching the net. He noticed that there were several trackerjackers stuck to the net, which made him grin. He took out the net and announced the trackerjackers were ready, and as Isla and Fur approached, he threw the net at their faces. As they began shouting obscenities at him, Spruce laughed and grabbed Holly before fleeing with her. He took one look at the struggling pair before grabbing their packs and running in the opposite direction. Fur was shrieking in agony as the trackerjackers stung him in the arm, whilst Isla tried to block them with her knife, but these efforts were futile. They managed to escape, but barely. Fur gasped in pain at his arm, whilst Isla gasped and let out a string of profanities. Fur appeared angry and asked her why she had even trusted the District 7 tributes, which made her scowl. As they muttered about the loss of their supplies, they walked forwards in the direction opposite to Spruce and Holly. They began sleeping after a bit, and this took most of the rest of the day. As they woke up, the sun was beginning to set, and they walked on. As they entered the clearing, Isla noticed a knife that had been dropped by Twyla hours before she fled. As she bent down to examine it, Fur grabbed a spear and raised it. Rubius grinned and muttered, "This is it," as Fur aimed his spear at Isla's back. As he threw his arm back, a large beetle suddenly crawled into the clearing, which distracted Fur. He threw his spear, yet Isla chose that moment to turn around and the spear flew to her right and hit the ground. Realizing Fur had been about to betray her, Isla lunged on top of him with her knife as well as Twyla's. They both hit the ground and Isla snarled, "You did, Neptune," as she kicked him between the legs. As he shouted out, he managed to get up and placed Isla on his shoulder before strutting towards the beetle. Isla angrily grabbed both the knives before simultaneously stabbing them down into Fur's buttocks. He shrieked out and collapsed to the floor in agony whilst Isla turned to flee from the beetle. In the metro section of Snow Square, Training Master Astriana threw a chair at the screen before charging at Sandy Selleck, and he had to be removed from the enclosure by peacekeepers. Isla fled and left Fur, who was crying from the pain in his buttocks. The sun set and Fur cried out in desperation as the beetle approached him. He slowly crawled away whilst cradling his wounds and managed to make it to a clearing. As he slept, the portraits of Neptune from 4, Train and Tamora, both from 6, Jess from 10, the girl from 11, and the girl from 12 were shown, which left just Calyx from 1, Isla from 4, Spruce and Holly, both from 7, Twyla from 8, Fur from 10, and Spud from 11 remaining. Fur awoke to the sound of a sponsor gift, which turned out to be ointment for his wound. As he applied it, Game Maker Friend announced that the arena would begin crumbling from the perimeter, and the only safe place for tributes to be was the cornucopia. Fur and Isla immediately grabbed their supplies and turned around, before running back to the cornucopia. Fur narrowly avoided crossing paths with Isla, and they both ran as fast as they could as the ground beneath them began crumbling. A cannon was heard, which was revealed to viewers to belong to Twyla, after she had misjudged her footing and had fallen off a cliff. Fur and Isla were about 20 minutes from the cornucopia, yet they ran extremely fast and both made it in time as the land beyond the clearing fell into an abyss. Calyx ran out from inside the cornucopia and began firing arrows at them, while Spud leapt inwards from the left. As he was doing so, Spruce jumped off the roof and threw his axe at Spud's neck, which caused his head to roll off and fall into the abyss, and also sounded his cannon. Spruce was fighting Holly now, and although Holly gained the upper hand, Spruce threw his axe at her head, which sounded her cannon. Spruce made a brave decision and charged at Calyx before blocking his arrows with his axe. As they began fighting, Isla charged at Neptune and slapped him as hard as she could. As they hit the ground, they tried to stab each other, yet as Fur was trying to force his spear into Isla's neck, a cannon sounded. This cannon belonged to Spruce after Calyx shot him in the neck with an arrow. Realizing they had to fight Calyx, Fur and Isla got to their feet and glared at him. Calyx appeared amused and grabbed Spruce's axe before throwing his bow and arrow towards Fur and kicking Isla's knife out of her hand. Fur frowned at Calyx, who laughed and told him to kill Isla. Fur glanced at Isla and raised a bow and loaded it with an arrow. He aimed at Isla, who snarled at him. She told him that her friends at the training academy were right about outlying scum. As she glared at him, she shouted that he had killed her boyfriend's brother and he had betrayed his own district partner. Fur lowered the arrow slightly, but upon noticing Calyx had his axe raised, he winced and turned the arrow towards Isla once again. Isla extended her middle finger at him and shouted obscenities at him. Calyx yawned and raised his eyebrows at Fur, who lowered the bow. He replied that he did not want to kill anymore, and Calyx raised the axe and threw it. Isla braced herself for impact, but suddenly realized that Calyx had not even been aiming for her. The axe hit Fur in the chest, which spun him away from Isla and onto the ground. Calyx laughed as Fur began groaning, which angered Isla. She ran towards him and tackled him to the ground. The two careers fought bravely, but Calyx gained the upper hand and pushed Isla against the cornucopia as he began strangling her. However, Fur had just managed to grab his spear and, despite clearly on the verge of death, he aimed his spear at Calyx's back. As Calyx began strangling Isla, he threw the spear. Calyx gasped and fell on top of Isla, who pushed him away. He roared, more in anger than in pain, and he staggered backwards. Isla spat at his feet and grabbed her knife, before plunging it into his heart. He roared again and fell to his knees, and Isla kicked him in the chest, which caused him to fall down. His cannon sounded and Isla looked at Fur. His shirt was now completely red from the blood and he was struggling to breathe. She crossed over to him and snarled at him, before muttering that he was simply playing the hero. As he gasped and looked up at her, she stabbed him in the neck.